go ahead and say he goes on to found a really good furniture store, and it becomes a nationwide chain later on.
I was going to ask if that's down in Texas. That's what I always think of with Ethan Allen.
Yeah, we have Ethan Allen, but anyway, I'm kidding, listeners. Obviously, he didn't start. It was named after him. But so there you go. So that's Fort Ticonderoga.
At this point, for these different militia companies, what does it look like if you have someone who does have some daring, like an Ethan Allen or a Benedict Arnold? Are they just circling around looking for strategic assets or weak targets that they can take over? They're sort of doing freelance work for the colonial cause. Or what is this like right now? Is anyone directing this?
Well, most of them are not. I mean, most of them, we talked a little bit about militia in one of the previous episodes. Militia were originally founded as kind of like a home guard. Their point was to defend the colony against Indian attacks or whatever other kind of attack there might be, mostly Indian attacks. But now that the British are being snarky and starting to cause trouble, their mission has changed. But at this point, militia, they're beginning to coalesce and get more organized. Their job now is to defend their towns against the British. But if they had a leader who was a swashbuckler like an Arnold or an Allen, both these guys were men of action. They wanted glory. They wanted to serve their country, for sure, but they also wanted to become famous. They wanted glory. They wanted promotion. And so if they saw something, some ripe fruit, I can't talk, but if they saw something hanging and then they would do it. But that was the exception rather than the rule, Scott. It's not like most militia units were just looking around. Oh, what's the next target we can take? Most of them were defensive in nature, at least at the beginning.
Well, let's get back to the action and return to our ping pong paddle. So what's happening around Boston? Hey everyone, Scott here. We're going to take a very short break for a word from our sponsors.
Yes! The ping pong paddle with the bite taken out of it. All right, so Boston, back to Boston. Boston's going to be kind of the center of action for quite some time here. The Patriot colonial governments appointed commanders who began to organize the militia companies into regiments. So again, we're getting more organized. As we saw, a company typically had 60, 70, 80 men, sometimes as much as 100, but usually 60 or 70 to 80. So they put them together into larger units. A company, this is almost the same as the Civil War, except they're a little smaller. A company is usually commanded by a captain, and then you would put 10 of those together. So if you think 60 men times 10, that's 600. That's a regiment, and a regiment would be commanded by a colonel. But this took time. We're talking about totally different units. They're not designed to work with other people. As I mentioned earlier, they are designed to be defensive and to defend their town or their county against invasion from outside. But now they are beginning to band together and try to get organized and march down toward Boston to put some pressure on the British. And they are totally unprofessional. We'll talk more about that later. We did mention this before, that militia were as much of a social thing as they were a military.
Yeah, it's the Elks Lodge that happened to have some muskets around.
Mm-hmm. When I introduced the concept of militia to my students, I always say, well, think of it kind of like the National Guard. These are part-time soldiers, but they are not anywhere near as professional
let's not
as the
National Guard with.
Exactly.
I'm
making a point to say our National Guard today is professional. They're good. They know what to do. They know how to do their jobs. They know how to fire weapons and to march and to fight in organized fashion. But these guys really didn't. So these new colonels, and there'll be some generals appointed too, they begin to try to whip these guys into shape. But like I said, it is like pulling teeth. All right. Again, we've talked about the geography of Boston, so I don't need to go over that again. One thing I will mention in addition to what we said about the ping pong paddle is that There was high ground to the southeast on the mainland. This was called the Dorchester Heights. Okay, so very high, looked down upon Boston. Boston was very low. It was just, I don't know if it was exactly sea level, but it was flat. And so you had high ground to the south and to the northwest, which is called the Charlestown Peninsula. More on that soon. The Charlestown Peninsula, I'll say for now, has 3 hills: Morton's Hill, Breed's Hill, and Bunker Hill. And we're just about to talk more about those. So as the British regular soldiers, the redcoats, were camped out in Boston, they would look up and they would see these heights and they would think, or at least the commanders would think, I'm sure most of them thought, we cannot let those fall into rebel hands. We've got to control the high ground, because if the rebels were to get men and especially cannon up onto that high ground, they could just fire it right down on us. We'd be sitting ducks. So there's going to be some conflict over this high ground. I'm setting the stage here because I want people to know why the Battle of Bunker Hill occurred. Why did the British choose to attack? Well, in a nutshell, they wanted to get control of the high ground. All right. So on May 27th, Massachusetts and New Hampshire militia troops seize Noodles Island, and we'll put a map.
Yeah, these will all be in the show notes
on the website.
Check these out for reference.
Yeah, I found a really good map of Revolutionary era Boston. There's plenty of them out there, but Noodles Island was a little bit to the north and east of Boston, and British troops attempted to retake the island, but the Patriots fought them off. So that doesn't work well for the British. And remember, for the British to capture any of this high ground, they had to go across water. They had to go across the Charles River. So, or on the other side, it was a different body of water, but they're almost completely surrounded by water.
So you're looking almost at an amphibious assault.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is obviously is much more complicated than just marching across land. You've got to get plenty of boats lined up. You've got to hurry and get across the water. You got to make sure that the other side doesn't have cannon shooting the crud out of you, things like that. Now, the Colonials, or the Patriots, shall we say, they wanted to put artillery pieces on the Dorchester Heights. And again, that would mean Boston would have to be evacuated. But they had almost none. That was the problem. The British chased them off in early June. They occupied the heights themselves, and that left only one area of high ground left to the rebels. By the way, the Dorchester Heights, we're going to talk about them again later, but they're going to be unoccupied by the British eventually. But for now, those are off limits to the Patriots. So we're looking at the Charlestown Peninsula. All right. And let's go ahead and talk about that.
So
did you want to
that means
say anything?
That they have to choose a hill to occupy. I wonder which one it is, this battle happening on a certain hill. Which one is it? Well,
funny you should ask, because the battle is actually misnamed.
Nice.
It's famously known as Bunker Hill. Now let me do it one of my mental maps, one of my famous by now mental or infamous mental maps. So when you are thinking about the Charlestown Peninsula, it's north of Boston. To get from Boston to this peninsula, you have to go across the Charles River. Like you said, it would have to be an amphibious assault. Think of a right triangle, okay? Think of a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Yes, folks, I did used to teach geometry. So you've got this triangle, and the vertex or the 90-degree angle is called Charlestown. That's a little town right in the corner. But north of that, moving toward the hypotenuse of the triangle, you have, and by the way, on the other side of the triangle is the Mystic River. So again, this peninsula is surrounded on 3 sides by water, kind of like Boston itself, although it's smaller. You have the Mystic River at the north, the Charles River at the bottom, and then Boston Harbor on the other side, which would be the east side. Sorry, the west side is the only side on which it is connected to the land, and that's called the Charlestown Neck. Now, on this Charlestown Peninsula, there are 3 hills. As I mentioned, there were Morton's Hill, which is on the far east side, or the right. If you're going with my mental map, think of my 45, 45, 90 triangle with the vertex pointing down closest to Boston. If that doesn't make sense, just pause and grab a real map. Anyway, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I thought this was a history podcast, not math. But then you had kind of in the center of the peninsula, you have Breed's Hill, and then to the left of the map or the west side, you have Bunker Hill. So the Patriot troops, they're in the overall command of a man named Artemus Ward, and he and the other generals decide to. Sorry, I lost my place here. They decided to occupy Bunker Hill in order to have a place from which to fire artillery into Boston. Like I said, let's get some men and some cannon up on this high hill, and then we can pick off the British soldiers like ducks in a row. About 1,200 militiamen moved onto the Charlestown Peninsula. Their job was to go on to Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill is the hill that is furthest to the left on our mental map or on a regular map. If you're looking at that, it's furthest to the west. It's closest to the mainland. So they're supposed to go up onto Bunker Hill, but instead they just make an executive decision right on the spot, and they decide to continue marching to the east, more onto the middle of the peninsula, onto Breed's Hill. I figure it's closer to Boston. Perhaps that was why they made the decision. It's closer to Charlestown. So they go up to Breed's Hill. And again, that's about 1,200 militiamen. So the battle is actually going to occur on Breed's Hill, and it should technically be called Breed's Hill, but it's been misnamed Bunker Hill since the day, and I'm not going to try to change it myself. Occasionally you'll hear a speaker or a lecturer say, it's the Battle of Breed's Hill, but everybody's like, what? What is that? So we'll call it Bunker Hill, even though the fighting does not occur on Bunker Hill. It's going to occur on Breed's Hill.
It's like the person who says the name isn't Sacagawea, it's Sacagawea. And yeah.
Good luck making that stick.
Don't worry, people. We're not going to be that guy.
Once they got onto Breed's Hill, they were commanded by William Prescott, Colonel William Prescott. Prescott decided to construct a redoubt. A redoubt is basically like a temporary fort. It's a small fort. And it was going to be 130 feet square with 6-foot high walls. Okay, so nothing special. It's not like Fort Ticonderoga or you think about Fort Duquesne or one of the major forts that you read about in history. This is a small deal. The redoubt was going to have a ditch in front of it. Okay, so this is a very nice little, even though it's quick and dirty, it'll be a pretty good defensive formation because they knew the British were going to come and attack. So might as well fortify, right? Might as well give yourself as much advantage as you can have. They also built a wall of earth and stone facing the west side of the peninsula. The wall facing the east side. Got my stuff mixed up here, but the wall stretched from the left side of the redoubt to a stone wall on the left or the north side of the peninsula. So again, it may help if you have a map, but imagine this right triangle, and in the very middle approximately is this redoubt, and then you draw a line straight up, or mostly straight up, all the way up to the water where the Mystic River was. So they decided to they have a rail fence at one point, and they have a stone wall part of the way. So they're taking advantage of whatever natural stuff they can to fortify their position. All right, so the British, they open up a cannonade. They fire cannonballs at them, both from ships as well as from the land, and they were mostly ineffective. But despite this, many militiamen left the hill to return home. And by the next day, the American force in the redoubt was down to about 500 or 600. And that's one of the things that always amazes me, Scott, about the Revolutionary War is just people just going home.
Yeah, there's no hanging for desertion or anything like that. Or maybe there is. I don't know how.
Well, there will be later. Yeah, there will be when they get more organized. But that's the thing about militia. It's a volunteer force. So, if you want to fight, fine. If not, that's fine too.
Just go back to the Elks Lodge and you're good.
Yeah, no kidding. Time for another beer. One colonial commander, a man named Israel Putnam, summoned reinforcements. And then also you had about 200 men under a couple of colonels named John Stark and James Reed. They arrived and they manned the wall that ran between the redoubt and the Mystic River. So we've got a pretty decent defensive formation that the Patriots have put together here. There was one other reinforcement that arrived, and this is really, at the time, he was very famous. Now, not many people today have heard of him, and we'll see why later. But a man named Joseph Warren, he was a doctor. He was a Patriot leader, friend of John Hancock and Samuel Adams.